I came to Pathfinder from 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons, and I always played homebrew campaigns in a homebrew setting. And so to me, what Pathfinder was an extension of the rule system that I really like. An extension, a revamping, a polishing. But it was the rules primarily and really exclusively until I started getting into Pathfinder as a fan and realizing that to some fans, Pathfinder was a setting. It was a world. It was a campaign setting. It was their Forgotten Realms. It was their Eberron. And the rules were just a means to an end for them. Now, I was, all right, I was going to say I was young. I was in my 20s, and by then I'd been role playing for 10 years. So I probably should have been aware that to some people, the setting was as important or more important than the system. But this was early internet and before that, pre internet days. And so I guess I just missed it. I was tunnel visioned into my own personal experience and was not as aware of what other people were doing in the same hobby as me. But it was undeniable that this was how some people saw Pathfinder, and the best evidence of this was the fact that you could play Pathfinder without playing Pathfinder. So I just wanted to go over some of the different ways you could play Pathfinder other than playing the Pathfinder role-playing game. Number one, other role-playing games. Technically, the Pathfinder setting and Pathfinder Adventures existed before the Pathfinder role-playing game ever existed. In fact, Rise of the Runelords, the seminal Pathfinder adventure, the one that kicked off the Adventure Path line, was published under 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons rules. So while it's only marginally different from first edition Pathfinder, technically speaking, if you want to play Pathfinder and you don't want to play Pathfinder, you can play 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons Pathfinder. But of course, this led into Pathfinder First Edition. Pathfinder Adventures for the next 10 years were all published under the Pathfinder role-playing game. Then in the 2020s, things got a little freaky. So first of all, second edition came out and went through a playtest, but I'm not counting the playtest as editions. But shortly after the release of second edition, Pinnacle Entertainment Group did something that I didn't think anyone would ever do, and that is they licensed the rights to make a Pathfinder role-playing game adaptation. They turned Rise of the Runelords into a Savage Worlds adventure. Now, Rise of the Runelords at that point was super associated with Paizo. Like, it is one of the most supported and revered adventures that Paizo had ever put out. And the Pathfinder name was plastered all over it. It was synonymous with the Pathfinder Adventure Path line. But for people that maybe neither edition or 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons, so neither edition of Pathfinder or 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons wasn't their cup of tea. Savage Worlds is a lighter, more narrative-focused role-playing game, and so this product allowed people to enter into the world of Pathfinder that we all knew and loved in the same way we did through Rise of the Runelords, but without having to worry about whatever issues they had with the Pathfinder role-playing game systems. Now, in addition to the Rise of the Runelords, they released their own version of the Advanced Player's Guide. They released the Curse of the Crimson Throne Adventure Path. Basically, Pinnacle went all in supporting a Savage Worlds version of Pathfinder. And this kind of changed the game. Okay, literally, but like it means that any role-playing game publisher out there with their own house system could potentially talk to Paizo and also be licensees of the Pathfinder world. Or if these other companies have some kind of open license, it also means that Paizo can publish material for other role-playing games, which was the case with Abomination Vaults for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Now, first, I need to address a conspiracy theory. There were some people that were saying that this was evidence that Paizo was giving up on second edition. The second edition was, by some interpretations, a failure, and therefore Paizo was going to become a third-party publisher of 5th edition material. Here's the thing. Logistically speaking, the most expensive part of publishing a role-playing game is the art, especially when it's of the quality of the product that Paizo puts out. And Paizo buys the art outright, so they own the art, which means that if they find more ways to reuse the art, such as in pawn sets or just other products, then technically that piece of art gets cheaper every time it gets reused. Or looking another way, the art budget of another project gets cheaper every time it gets reused. So with Abominations Vaults, they could produce an entire experimental supplement just to see what the 5th edition interest is in the Pathfinder world and Pathfinder Adventures without having to pay a dime into the most expensive part of publishing a new role-playing game. That doesn't mean it's automatically going to be successful. There's still the production costs, and what Paizo did with Abomination Vaults was actually like exactly what they needed to do. They brought in people who knew 5th edition. They made sure that it wasn't just a one-to-one translation of the adventure. They made sure that it followed the rhythms of 5th edition and that it was a proper 5th edition adventure. So there was design and development time that went into it, even though the adventure already existed. But still, it was, if it was, it would have to be like ridiculously successful for it to replace Pathfinder 2nd edition, because it was just a way of getting more use out of something that they'd already paid for. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, it is cool that if you are playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and you know, statistically, you probably have, then having the option to play a Pathfinder adventure, and a very popular one of the most popular ones of the new edition, getting to play it as a 5th edition module is a novelty for us as Pathfinder players and is a whole new experience for Dungeons & Dragons players. Now, if you're listening to No Direction, odds are you aren't looking for another role-playing game system to play Pathfinder. However, you might be interested in some of the other ways that you can play Pathfinder, such as the adventure card game. The adventure card game doesn't get talked about much now, and probably because it ended around the same time 2nd edition launched, and so a whole new crop of influencers became exposed to Pathfinder and like started spreading the message on the internet. But the Pathfinder adventure card game was huge. It came out in 2013 at Gen Con, and at that point, Paizo had this streak of underestimating demand for their new product. But never did they underestimate demand like they did for the adventure card game, because the box set came out and sold out in 4 hours on day one. Normally, they sell out Saturday afternoon, but of the new role-playing game releases. But no, this just took the gaming world by storm. It was on the hot list on Board Game Geek for months. It was well reviewed, and it was not only fully embraced by the board gaming community, who were looking for the next level up of deck building games, which were very popular at the time, but there was a faction of Pathfinder fans that were big into the adventure card game. And luckily for them, Paizo was very supportive of it. They had an adventure card game, Pathfinder Society. The Adventure Card Guild. Here's one of my Chronicle sheets from playing it, because this wasn't just a card game where, it reused Paizo art and it used Paizo concepts, but was otherwise detached from the role-playing experience. No, it went very far in adapting everything about the role-playing game experience except for role-playing. You made your own character, like you could customize your character, and then you went on an adventure and you did just different missions on the adventure, and in doing so, you learned new spells, gained new equipment, and you added them to your character's deck, customizing your character further. And then once the adventure was done, you had to shuffle down or discard down to a certain size deck, and you can discard some of your old equipment and keep some of this new equipment. So you were upgrading your character as you went, and you could play long-term campaigns of this card game. Without exaggeration, there were thousands of cards released for this game, because they would release box sets every few months based on the different adventure paths. And like, the adventure paths they picked were wildly different in theme. So you got Rise of the Rune Lords, then you got Skull and Shackles, the pirate adventure, then you got Wrath of the Righteous, which was, the demon hunting adventure. I mentioned they put out thousands of cards, so not just the adventures, they put out different decks for the different classes you could play. And do I have the Harrower? Oh, the Occult Adventures deck. Oh, that's fun. Now, I was only casually into the game, but Paizo gifted attendees of PaizoCon with character decks for the adventure card game. And they dedicated a lot of space at the conventions to fans of the adventure card game. Like, you would go into the ballroom that would, the year before, have been completely dedicated role-playing. About a third of it was instead sectioned off for adventure card game players. It was really it was a major part of being a Pathfinder fan, even though it was something that maybe a bunch of people were not playing. But I do remember when it was announced, and at the banquet that night, I was sitting at Crystal Fraser's table, and Robert Kenzie, who is a third-party publisher, was talking about he heard about the card game, but he likes the actual Pathfinder game. And I joked at the time, oh no, it's an actual game. The card game is an actual game. It's not just playing cards. And I did not know how true that statement would be until years later when just the game continued to grow and grow. And while it never rivaled Pathfinder as far as like the identity of a game called Pathfinder, it carved a pretty big niche in the history of Pathfinder, and the reason that this game is successful and beloved by gamers everywhere. Now let's get digital. Owlcat's Pathfinder CRPGs. Now I just talked about all the ways that the adventure card game recreated the role-playing game experience other than the role-playing element of it. The same could be true for Owlcat's Pathfinder CRPG. CRPG, computer role-playing game. It's a video game. The thing is that the way Owlcat recreated the Pathfinder experience is completely different from how the adventure card game recreated the Pathfinder experience. It is Pathfinder First Edition. Now the card game may have summarized a lot of the adventures with just a little bit of flavor text, and otherwise victories and defeats were what was telling the story. The CRPG was embellishing the story. It was taking everything you were doing and incorporating into the world. Kingmaker especially, this was obvious because Kingmaker is a kingdom building game, and just like in the tabletop RPG, you are customizing the kingdom, you are making decisions, adding different buildings and elements to your city based on what you think the city needs. But in the video game, it goes further because the choices you are making along a moral spectrum affect the aesthetic of your kingdom. And so if you were playing a very evil game, you get, let's say lawful evil, you get a very twisted authoritarian city. Whereas if you're overall being good, it's a very open city and there's just like a harmony to the sweeping, establishing shots across your kingdom. Now there was a downside. Like I said, this was based on the role-playing game. It used the role-playing game as a system. Did not do a great job explaining how the role-playing game works. And so there were some people that are used to more streamlined, lighter role-playing systems for their CRPGs, getting confused and frustrated when they would encounter a creature with damage reduction, not understand how damage reduction works, and just feel like they are getting just handedly beaten time after time by what should be a random encounter. There was also just issues with the way it played in real time and other decisions that Owlcat made, because unlike a GM, they did not have the flexibility to just do whatever the players wanted. But the fan base did. Because Kingmaker had an active modding community, you could find mods and customize the game to your own personal preferences. And the more popular mods were actually officially incorporated into Wrath of the Righteous, which was the follow-up to Kingmaker, and is generally perceived to be a less buggy and smoother experience. Whether you like it more than Kingmaker depends on which adventure you prefer, because they are very different stories. But ultimately, you saw how Owlcat was learning from the community, taking that feedback and incorporating it into what they were doing. Those are some of the highlights of the ways that you can play Pathfinder other than playing Pathfinder. And we know there's more to come. We've got Pathfinder Quest, obviously, which will hopefully deliver next year. We've got Pathfinder Gallowspire Survivors, which is a new video game. It is a roguelike bullet hell. So think of Enter the Gungeon, but it's Pathfinder and you're entering Tarbafon's tomb. I am curious what the next breakthrough in this area is going to be. I can definitely see another role-playing game company trying to license some of the adventures that Paizo has done. And of course, it felt like we got so close to a Pathfinder miniature battle game when the original Pathfinder miniatures were called Pathfinder Battles shortly after the Dungeons & Dragons miniature game was ended, but that just ended up being an unfulfilled dream. As a Pathfinder fan, what kind of Pathfinder game would you like to play that's not strictly a role-playing game or any of the games we mentioned today? You can share your thoughts in the comments below or go to nodirectionpodcast.com and join our Discord to join the conversation there.